The power of selective attention is often best evidenced by what doesn't make it in. So we can miss stimuli that appear right in front of our eyes if we are not paying attention. This phenomena is called inattentional blindness. Inattentional blindness. How many of you have seen the invisible gorilla video? Okay, if you haven't seen that before, you might want to look it up online. It's kind of fun. But most people have, so I'm actually going to use a different example here. So first, stop a minute and think about this. Do you think that you would notice if the person waiting on you at a counter turned into an entirely different person right before your eyes? I want you to watch this young man. Hey, this is after he was served, and he's watching a video, so you're going to watch the video and then see his reaction to it. So he's being shown a video after his transaction on how he totally missed this service person transformation at the counter. So this goes really quickly, so pay attention. And notice that the woman who begins waiting on him is brunette.
So the next time you're positive about what you think you saw, take a moment to reconsider, because as we've shown you, what you think you see is not always what you get. Wow. All right.
Adaptation can also affect whether we pay attention to a stimulus, right? Adaptation is the process of becoming desensitized to a stimulus with prolonged exposure, so we pay it less attention over time. If you've ever moved near a railroad track, it's likely it bothered and even woke you repeatedly at first, but over time you learn to ignore it even in your sleep. Clearly, marketers do not want consumers to adapt to their ads. Here's a few factors that marketers try or should try to avoid because they can induce adaptation. Now, the first one is simplicity. Now, remember how tricky complexity can be? Remember that? You want your message to be complex, but not too complex. But you also don't want it to be too simple. The more simple a stimulus, the more quickly we tend to adapt to it over time because it doesn't require that much cognitive capacity to process. A simple 3 small word message, for example, may be easy to comprehend, but after enough time passes, it will stop capturing our attention. Now, billboards, which really need to be limited to a few words, right, must achieve their complexity in different ways, such as with intense or surprising stimuli. Low intensity can also prompt adaptation. Soft sounds, for example, or faint aromas, or dull colors, all produce quicker adaptation because they are weaker energies playing on the sense organs. And then finally, we have high repetition can also really enhance adaptation. So repetition usually is a good thing. You may not experience it that way, but up to a certain point, it really works. How often have you been bombarded with the same ads over and over again? Cadillac once purchased all of the ad time, all of it, for an entire season premiere episode of Mad Men, just to ensure that their ad didn't get lost in the clutter. So repetition works, however, not too much repetition, because that can lead to adaptation where it is no longer paid attention. And that phenomena is called advertising wear out, using too much repetition where people adapt to it. Now here's a really interesting question. What about subliminal perception? First, what is meant by subliminal? It means that it is presented just under the threshold of conscious attention, but within the window of unconscious perception. So it is not perceived consciously, but it is still perceived unconsciously. Sound tricky? Because it is. Now, supraliminal, on the other hand, means presented at or above the threshold of conscious awareness. That's what we see with normal advertising. So what about subliminal advertising? Can marketers use subliminal advertising without your even consciously knowing to cause you to purchase something you would not have otherwise purchased? The hype about subliminal advertising was kicked off in the 50s when a researcher named Vickery conducted a notoriously faulty study. He claimed, for many, many reasons, notoriously faulty, but he claimed to have sold more concession stand popcorn as a result of subliminally flashing the words, "Hungry? Eat popcorn," on some theater screens before the showing of films. Pretty cool or scary, depending on how you look at it, right? So you can imagine this really, really made the headlines. However, the other researchers could not replicate this. So never mind the myriad fatal flaws of the study, including using the wrong control group. It was eventually discovered that Vickery fabricated his data as well. Now, that is a great way to become a famous scientist. Your name will not be forgotten. And regardless of how many degrees you've earned or how many valid studies you've published before that, you get to choose a whole new career. Okay, so further research has since shown the final verdict on the subliminal advertising question to be definitive and threefold. Okay, so one, it is very difficult and expensive to pull off subliminal advertising because everyone's threshold windows are different and very, very narrow. So it would have to be presented, first off, you'd have to measure it with every single person that it's going to be exposed to, the advertisement, and then present it within their window. And, even in the unlikely event that you did somehow pull this off, subliminal advertising is no more effective than superliminal advertising. In other words, you might as well advertise superliminally. It's much easier. And then finally, number three, at best, subliminal advertising only conveys the main theme. I think I'll get something to drink. It is not brand specific. Okay. So subliminal advertising is never used anymore, right? Not. The most persistent uses are actually found in liquor ads, cigarette ads, and believe it or not, Coca-Cola and Pepsi products. In fact, the most frequently used objects in print to insert these in are artist drawings of ice cubes in a glass. Know that artists actually need to draw them. They can't be photographed for an ad because it melts too quickly under the lights. And, if you're an artist, you know that ice cubes are not just clear, right? That they reflect everything in the room. So there's a whole lot going on in a realistic looking drawn ice cube. And it's easy to hide images within it. But do know that even though we do see this being used, mostly it's just used facetiously by graphic designers in these companies who sometimes like to see what they can get away with and without being noticed, even by their own employers. The most popular ideas that we find in these examples are very Freudian. So remember Freud's driving instincts from Psych 101, libido and thanatos, in other words, sex and death? Freud claimed that images of sex and or death grab people's attention, especially when they can indulge in guiltless pleasure. So when the ideas are symbolized or otherwise indirect, so that they're dealt with only unconsciously without the guilt. Read subliminal, right? So can you see the word sex in this Pepsi can design on your slide? If you didn't find it, I'm going to show you with my pointer here, S, E, and X. Okay?